On October 18, 1867, the U.S. purchased Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million. Ignored by this exchange were Alaskan natives, whose ancestral lineage spanned over 10,000 years in the icy territory. The U.S. discriminated against, segregated, and forced Native Alaskans into assimilation to acquire basic rights. Often forgotten is the Indigenous Civil Rights Movement, one that began in Alaska and passed historic legislation decades before the continental U.S. It stands especially behind one female trailblazer, whose lifelong fight and powerful words have remained hidden from history books. Elizabeth Peratrovich helped spark an Indigenous rights revolution in Alaska by rallying against widespread anti-Native segregation. Despite fierce reactions of opposition from Alaskan lawmakers, her work and final commanding testimony ultimately drove the historic reform of the 1945 Anti-Discrimination Act, the first anti-discrimination law passed in the United States, and one that laid a civil rights framework for future generations. When Russia transferred Alaska to the United States, life for Alaskan natives shifted from limited interaction with Russians, aside from harmful experiences with the fur trade, to a period of forced assimilation, loss of sovereignty, and land being torn away, including native Southeast Alaskan land of the Haida, Tsimshian, and Tlingit tribes. The U.S. segregated schools, neighborhoods, theaters, and businesses, while no natives allowed signs banned Indigenous people from their own land.
There were so many incidents where we didn't have access to our very own land that we were accustomed to using. There was the effort to make sure that none of us were going to speak Tlingit. So my grandmother whispered the language in the house. It was like we had to sneak to speak our language. And I'm sorry, but it makes me emotional. Still.
Native communities and activists worked hard for change. Soon, a Tlingit woman's powerful words and drive for bold action would advance a movement against generational discrimination. Her name was Elizabeth Peratrovich. Elizabeth was born on July 4th, 1911.
Her Tlingit name was Kahkalat.
And she spent her early years learning valued Tlingit oratory and public speaking skills. As a young adult, she met her husband, Roy. The two were connected by a shared drive for justice and equality for Native Alaskans. They became an activist team, eventually leading as the grand presidents of the Alaskan Native Brotherhood and Sisterhood, organizations formed to pioneer civil rights for Indigenous people. In 1941, they moved to Juneau, believing the capital offered the greatest potential for legislative change. And in 1943, working with Alaskan Governor Ernest Greening, Elizabeth, Roy, and others drafted an anti-discrimination bill with a clear goal: to ban segregation and racial discrimination. Despite some support, many did not want the bill to pass, and in the end, it was rejected. The next opportunity to pass the bill would be in 1945. Instead of compromising it, they adapted and forged a new plan. Governor Greening got districts redrawn, which allowed for more opportunity for Alaskan natives to run for office. Elizabeth embarked on a campaign to lead a revolutionary movement to end Jim Crow-style segregation in Alaska. She flew with a bush pilot thousands of miles, and then traveled, sometimes by sled dog, to spread the word about the Anti-Discrimination Act, rally support, and search for Alaskan natives to run for office. She spent years building chapters of the Alaska Native Brotherhood and Sisterhood to unite Native Alaskans towards the cause, urging them to write public officials and include signatures of all leaders to show unity. She built a coalition of Republican and Democratic Native Alaskans in her anti-discrimination efforts.
By speaking out, writing letters, talking to the governors, lobbying legislators, traveling around the state, they challenged the status quo.
2 Native Alaskans had been elected to the legislature. The groundwork was laid, and on February 5th, 1945, after years of intricate planning and tireless campaigning, the day had come. Alaskan Native representatives joined with others dedicated to equality, and the decision came. The bill had passed the House. But it wasn't over yet. It still had to pass in the Senate, where the body was smaller, with no Alaskan Native representation. The Senate had members that echoed fierce reactions of opposition. One senator, Alan Shattuck, remarked, quote, "The races should be kept further apart. Who are these people barely out of savagery who want to associate with us whites with over 5,000 years of recorded civilization behind us?" Senator Frank Whaley echoed his message, while Senators Tolbert Scott and Grenold Collins also stood firmly against the bill. As the session was about to end, they asked if members of the public had anything to say. In that moment, Elizabeth walked to the front of the room and began her powerful testimony. Speaking, "I would not have expected that I, who you say am barely out of savagery, would have to remind gentlemen with 5,000 years of recorded civilization of our Bill of Rights." She explained how she and Roy were denied a home because they were Alaskan Native. She continued, "There are three kinds of persons who practice discrimination. First, the politician, who wants to maintain an inferior minority group so he can always promise them something. Second, the Mr. and Miss Jones who aren't quite sure of their social position and who are friendly one day, but not the next. Third, the person who believes in the superiority of the white race." An opposing senator challenged her, asking if the proposed bill would eliminate discrimination. Elizabeth confidently responded that no law could eliminate crime, but you could speak your intent to help us overcome discrimination. When the vote was taken, the Anti-Discrimination Act passed. It was the first enforced and permanent anti-discrimination law in the United States, predating the 1964 Civil Rights Act by nearly 2 decades. Governor Greening went on to say the act was the most important piece of legislation passed in Alaska, and would have never passed without Elizabeth's speech. Elizabeth had spearheaded a revolutionary movement for Indigenous rights, fought off oppositional reactions, and helped lead Alaska towards the historic reform of the 1945 Anti-Discrimination Act. After the act passed, there were both positive and negative public reactions. News outlets published about the power of Elizabeth's speech and the historic reform. Negative reactions also spread, with discriminatory comments in the papers opposing the new legislation. Some saying that Native Alaskans had not, quote, earned the right to equality. The act had immediate impacts. In the short term, the law worked to dismantle Jim Crow in Alaska, as segregation became illegal. There were penalties for discrimination, with $250 fines and up to 30 days in jail. The act also led to the prosecution of individuals who kept segregation signs up, this time against Black Alaskans. When the cases were brought to court, the violators were penalized under the Anti-Discrimination Act. The act also had long-term impacts in Alaska and across the United States. The legislation set the stage for the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, the largest land claim settlement in U.S. history that gave 44 million acres of land back to Indigenous people. Elizabeth's work also encouraged further Indigenous representation in the legislature and government. To date, 46 Alaskan Natives have served in the state Senate. After the act was passed, Elizabeth continued her anti-discrimination efforts across the country, attending countless civil rights meetings and teaching activists across the U.S. the framework for the Anti-Discrimination Act. Speaking at civil rights conventions where Dr. Martin Luther King also spoke, Elizabeth never stopped fighting for equal rights across America until December 1st, 1958, the day she passed away. In 1988 in Alaska and in 2023 nationally, Elizabeth was recognized for her role as a civil rights revolutionary, with February 16th officially being named Elizabeth Peratrovich Day.
It was inspirational. It was inspiring for us young Tlingit people at the time to have people to look up to.
Speaking up makes a difference, and the words of just one person can make an incredible difference.